Hey y'all, it's Dr. Mandy, editor and researcher extraordinaire, and you're listening to Dr. Mandy Unedited. Today we're going to talk about how to write a purpose statement, a problem statement, and research questions for your dissertation. But first, I got a little juicy story for you, as always. So I want to tell you about how I met the king of Great Britain. Oh my gosh, you guys. I actually met the king a few weeks ago. It's going to be several weeks ago by the time that you listen to this, just because I record things way, way, way in advance. But yes, I got to meet the king. So if you don't know, I am from the US. I live in the UK. And I can't tell you the who, what, where, when, or why of how I got this opportunity to meet the king. But basically, one day, my husband said that we were going to go to a very fancy event. And I was asking him, who, what, where, when, and why, what time, what's it gonna be like, what do I need to wear? And of course, he just kept telling me that he didn't know anything, he just knew the date of this event. So we didn't know who was going to be there, what time it was going to be at. And of course, that had me panicking and trying to prepare because I was like, I think the whole time I was just like so worried about finding the right outfit for this fancy event to impress my husband's colleagues. But as time went on and I was trying to get a hold of other people that were working the event to try to see if they knew anything, of course, nobody did, but somebody mentioned that this was a VVIP event, which I thought by VVIP they meant probably like somebody pretty high up in my husband's job was going to be there, and so everyone just needed to dress right and be on their best behavior. I had no idea until my husband told me later that day that when that person had told us it was a VVIP event, VVIP was code for there would be royalty there. And at that point, I was like losing my mind because I don't know, again, I was worried about what I was gonna wear and I couldn't figure out what time of day, if this was gonna be a nighttime event or a daytime event, all of that stuff. All I was worried about was just acting the part, really. So then we got up to like a couple of days before the event, and my husband, I forgot how we found out, but like somehow we were kind of coming to the conclusion that like, oh my God, like I think the king might actually be there. But in my mind, I was just like, how is the king actually going to be there? Like I was like filtering through like who's going to be like the possible royals there. I thought like, probably like Prince William, Princess Kate, the king, Camilla, like, I just thought like there is no way on earth like any of those like really high up there kind of people was going to be in the same room as me in a few days. But we went to where we were supposed to go the day that we were supposed to go there. We actually went the night before because we were told that we were going to be on deck for 9 a.m. So it was a daytime event. Thankfully, I chose the right clothes to to wear because my first plan of action was like a full gown. And I'm so thankful that I didn't end up having to wear a full gown at 9 a.m. But anyway, yeah, we went to the venue the night before. We spent the night. We had to get our passes the night before. And I didn't even notice on our pass, like, all I saw at the top was that, like, we were VIP guests. But I didn't realize until the next day that it actually said for the visit of King Charles III on it. So the next morning when I'm getting dressed, like I'm still in complete denial that like, I was like, there's no way the king is going to be here. And I was still thinking about all the possibilities of like who we were going to meet this day. But then my husband showed me the pass and I read, oh my gosh, I was just like, oh my gosh, it actually says King Charles III is going to be here. And so when we got dressed, we ended up going to there was like there was a building with a specific room, and there was probably like 30 of us that were invited to stand in this room. So it's 9 a.m. in the morning. We're all stood in this room. And there was like this whole event going on outside. There was like other people around and stuff. It was only just certain groups of people that were invited to personally meet the king. And I was realizing as I stood in this room. So yeah, there's about 30 people stood in this room. There's no chairs, nothing. We get a brief that we are supposed to stand in small groups around the edges of the room. We are supposed to, like if you're on the female persuasion, you're supposed to do a brief curtsy and I think say your majesty and something like that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I took ballet classes when I was a kid until probably like I was only like 6 or 7 because those were really expensive classes. And so I had not ever done anything in any way, shape, or form that resembles a curtsy since then. And so I was starting to get a little bit nervous about the curtsying part. And the terrible thing is that, they couldn't tell us when exactly the king was arriving for security reasons. So we're all just like stood in this room getting super, super nervous. And my husband's getting nervous. I'm getting nervous. Everyone in our little, group of people is getting nervous. And we had to stand there and wait for about 2.5 hours. And so about 11:30 is when the king rocked up and there's like all this fanfare going on outside. There's like bagpipes, there is a brass band, there's gunfire going off. There are like, just it's everything that you could think of is happening outside. But again, we're stood in this room with the windows open, all trying to like peek outside and see when the king comes. And then finally we could see him through the window walk into our building. And I was so excited because my feet hurt so badly at this point. But then, of course, they had to give him a tour of the entire building before he came to meet us. So the building, had a lot of historical artifacts in it. And they had also, I noticed, pulled out all the crazy, silverware and all this stuff. And he, I guess, had to walk around the whole building and get like a really nice formal tour of it all. And then after that, we weren't the only room of people. There was a second room of people who were a little bit more important than me and my husband and everyone in our room. So, he had to go meet them. And we were expecting that we were told that he was only going to have 15 minutes to meet with us. And so we weren't really expecting that he was going to shake everyone's hand or speak to everyone, more so that he was just going to, maybe kind of bumble around, say hello, do his duty, and then leave. But when he came into our room, he actually was probably there for a good 45 minutes. He ended up walking around the entire room, shaking everyone's hand, and he asked every single person questions. When he got to me, I nailed the curtsy. I got to shake his hand, and I don't know, I was just flabbergasted. So he asked about our kids. My husband has two kids from a previous marriage, and the king asked all about, how smart they were, what school they were going to, what they were achieving at. And I thought that was really cool. But I did notice a funny thing that he was mentioning to everybody about asking if we all had plenty of tea and coffee to drink. And so he kind of started our conversation with, oh, did you guys get enough tea and coffee to drink? And so, funnily enough, about 5 minutes later, someone came in with a silver tray, and I'm kidding, I'm not even kidding, y'all. There was like three people stood around, like doing this fancy etiquette and serving the king a cup of tea whilst he was speaking to the rest of the people in the room. And so he just stood in the room with his cup of tea for, the rest of the line of people that were waiting to meet him. And we weren't allowed to take pictures or have our phones in the room, but there was a photographer in the room, and me and my husband were both making sure that we were posing on point in hopes of getting some good pictures. So as soon as I figure out where those pictures might be, I'm definitely going to show you guys. But anyway, he left the room. They did some other fanfare and stuff, But what I was really like intrigued about is that first of all, when he came in, he only had a Beamer and an SUV. Like that was it. And then he had maybe like three or four bodyguards with him. Of course, we can all assume that he probably had a lot of hidden firepower, you know what I mean? But I just thought, when you see like those like motorcades in the US, I thought it was going to be this whole thing about like motorcycles and cars with flags on them, blah blah blah. But he just showed up with like a handful of people and then he left with a handful of people, and I just thought that was so wild. I also thought, it really was nice, the time that he spent with us. I think, not to be like sound disrespectful or anything, but like as like an American and an elder millennial, I was all about the Diana era. And so for me, really, the whole thing of meeting the king was just to like, like see the man that was involved in the Diana and Camilla drama. But in the end, he did gain my respect. I think that was like a really nice thing that he did for all of us. And yeah, no, it was really cool. He's also surprisingly quite short. I thought, like in the pictures, and again, you just think of Diana. I thought Diana was likely this, tall, statuesque person. And I think in the pictures, he generally looks like a tall person, but he is not. He was quite short, and that was one thing that surprised me. But anyway, that is how I met the king, and it was definitely a life experience. I'm pretty proud of that one. Anyway, let's go ahead and get back to our regularly scheduled programming. First of all, problem, purpose statements, and research questions. What are they? Okay, so a problem statement, believe it or not, is, well, it's a problem that exists in research. The purpose statement is what this study that you are conducting is going to do about solving that problem. And then the research questions will reveal exactly how you're going to explore the problem to make the solution happen. So I've said this before, I'll say it again. Once you've got these locked down, keep your problem, your purpose, and your research questions open on a Word document in front of you while you do all the rest of your research so that every time that you sit down to write, you are reminded of this holy trinity, so to speak. It will help you really stay focused on what you're striving for, because you'll be surprised how often your mind will stray into like rabbit holes on your project, and you'll have to like go back and ask yourself if what you wrote was really important, and then you kind of waste a lot of time, if you have to like go back and ask yourself those questions. So let's go ahead and start with the problem statement, how to write a problem statement. So first things first, here are two main issues that I see with problem statements. First, your problem statement cannot simply be that there is a lack of literature on your topic. I know that it seems like they tell you go find a gap in your research, and then you go find that gap and it's saying, hey, I need to be filled. That's obviously a problem, but you need to have a little bit more context to this. Secondly, the other issue that I see is that people will state problems in their own perspective without evidence, to suggest that it is a wider issue. So, for example, someone might say that the problem is secondary school teachers struggle to understand new technological educational tools. However, it may be that the researcher has experienced that problem of being an educator and struggling to understand technological tools, and has stated it as such without, really proving that a lot of secondary teachers have problems understanding technological tools for education. So when coming up with a problem statement, focus on keeping it focused, researchable, and rooted in evidence. So try out this structure when writing a problem statement. And remember that at different universities, they often have specific wording that they want you to use, and they often want you to start your problem statement sentence out with the problem is. Okay, but try this structure. So number one is state what is already known about the topic and then add like an although or despite in front of it. So this will set the reader up to better know like how big a deal your problem is. Number two is state the problem and why it exists in this context. And then number three is what are the consequences of the problem? So here's an example from my dissertation. I'm sorry, guys. Like whenever I record these podcasts, I definitely go back and I like refer to my own stuff. But I do try to source examples from elsewhere. Don't worry. But let's talk from my purpose statement. First, we state what we already know, and again, it's going to start with something like the problem is. So the problem is that although experts recommend a variety of collaborative support for students in educational settings, so that's what we already know, then we're going to state the problem and why it exists. So, continuing. Homeschool families may struggle to develop or access meaningful collaborative relationships to foster the success of their students. So we know what's existed, we know that people are already starting to suggest that collaborative support for students can be really, really helpful. And then we've stated a problem, but it's difficult for homeschool families to develop and access these meaningful collaborative relationships in order to get to their students' success. So now the consequence. Parents are typically the primary teachers in homeschool settings, but have to search for collaboration with others to offer their children a multitude of educational experiences. Okay, so the consequence is that if they do not get these collaborative relationships going, then their kids are going to miss out on, a lot of really valuable education. If you want to expand on this whole problem statement section, you may go on to talk about the elements you are looking at in your study and how they have been proven effective in the past and how it may be effective in your study. Of course, you're going to go into detail about this stuff later throughout different parts of your dissertation. You don't want to go into like a whole thing, but you can maybe just, do a sentence or two describing how the elements of your study are really going to help solve the problem. Okay, so writing a purpose statement. So this is the response to your problem. Basically, what are you going to do about it? And you're basically going to take your topic title to restructure it into a purpose statement. So whilst you're writing this purpose statement, definitely have the title of your topic in front of you. So try out this structure, and I do have some visuals of each of these structures that I'm mentioning today on my link tree in my description, or they're on my website, so go check out those, but try this structure out. So start your sentence with the purpose of this, and then insert qualitative, quantitative, mixed. Study is to, and then you're going to want to put something like explore, examine, or investigate. Next, mention the phenomenon in the population or the context that you're using. Using what method or design? Okay, that was a mouthful, and I know that was probably really hard to listen to. Okay, so here's an example. The purpose of this qualitative study is to explore the experiences of UK secondary school teachers in supporting autistic students using semi-structured interviews and thematic analysis. Okay, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, but your last tips for your purpose statement Be specific. Again, use your topic title and make sure that your purpose statement aligns with the problem. Okay, finally, we're going to talk about research questions. So these questions are going to help you answer the problem. They're meant to help guide you through your entire data collection and analysis process. So it's really important that you choose questions that are really going to cover the full scope of your study. And so typically there you'll have like 1 to 3 research questions, depending on how many elements of the topic that you have. You don't want these to be close-ended questions. You don't want them to be yes or no questions. So think about using what questions, okay? And keep in mind that these questions need to be answerable through your chosen method. So if you have a phenomenology, you want to ask questions about the description of something. So, how do teachers describe their experiences in supporting autistic students? If you're doing a grounded theory and you're looking for patterns, you may want to start your question with something like, what is the process? So, what processes do teachers use to adapt classroom practices for autistic students? If you're using a quantitative study, you want to have words that relate to numbers, like what is the relationship between, or what percentage. So, what percentage of secondary teachers report confidence in supporting autistic students? All right, now that you have got all of that, make sure that your purpose, your problem, and your research questions all match up. So ask yourself if your research problem matches the purpose. So your problem is your problem, and the purpose is what you're going to do about that problem. And then ask yourself if the questions will help fulfill your purpose. Okay? All right. That is your crash course in writing a solid problem statement, purpose statement, and research questions. Remember, they do not have to be perfect on the first go, so you can definitely start messy with them and revise, as often as you need to. That's definitely what I do anyway. But in the meantime, I am happy to help you out. Get a hold of me if you need to through my website, www.drmandyedits.com, or my email, which is mandykf@gmail.com. That's mandiekf@gmail.com. And if you want a visual for all of the structures that we talked about today, there is some free downloads on my link tree in the digital product section. You can find that link in the description, or on my website in the media section. Is also on my link tree is my social media, and I'm trying to build it up a little bit, okay? I'm just trying to get myself out there a little bit more. So if you would please consider checking out my link tree and looking up all of my socials. So I've got like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, pick your poison. The next episode, we are going to talk about all about the parts of a method section. This is going to be a 2-part series focusing more on planning the methods you're going to use for your project. So this is not necessarily going to be about writing the method section yet, but we will get there eventually. Okay, y'all. That's all I got to say about that. Go practice your curtsies. You never know when you're gonna need them in life. I definitely didn't. And I'll talk to you later, okay? See you. Bye.